Welcome to Podkey Slopcast, where AI policy, products, and incentives get pressure tested. This episode has a weirdly consistent theme: systems that claim to manage risk while quietly creating new risks of their own. That runs from export controls on frontier models to AI tools for kids to prediction markets being pushed as harmless engagement. The clearest fact pattern is this. In June, the Commerce Department used emergency export controls to block foreign nationals, including Anthropic staff outside the US, from accessing Anthropic's most powerful models, Fable 5 and Mythos 5. The reported trigger was an Amazon-found jailbreak that could extract restricted information, but the government did not publicly show the technical details, and that matters because emergency powers are easiest to defend when the evidence is visible and the rule is legible. Without that, everyone is left guessing about the actual threshold. Was this a catastrophic vulnerability, a narrow exploit with containment options, or a broader robustness failure that lots of labs also have? After the initial ban, the administration partly reversed course and let Anthropic restore limited access to Mythos for a select group of US organizations. In practice, that starts to look like a licensing regime, even if nobody wants to call it that. Anthropic and OpenAI both say the regime is opaque, and their complaint is not hard to understand. If there are no public criteria for what makes a model safe enough to access, then firms can't design to the standard. Access becomes an exercise in persuading officials rather than meeting a test. That does not automatically mean the government is wrong to intervene. If a model can be abused in a way that existing safeguards plainly fail to stop, some intervention may be justified. The stronger critique is that ad hoc intervention scales badly and invites political judgment where technical due process should be doing the work. The alternative people keep pointing to is pretty concrete: pre-deployment testing rules, evidence-based evaluations, appeal procedures, and enough in-house technical staff to interpret model behavior without improvising policy in a panic. There's also a strategic contradiction hanging over this. Critics argue it's incoherent to choke domestic access to US frontier systems while still allowing pathways that let rivals benefit elsewhere, including via China-facing diffusion. If the real concern is illicit distillation of US models, then targeted sanctions on firms doing that may fit the problem better than a blunt access ban. Anthropic then made the story wider by saying the vulnerability pattern exposed in Fable can be reproduced in other frontier systems too, including models like GPT 5.5 and K2.7. If that's right, this is less an Anthropic scandal than an industry robustness problem. That cuts both ways. On one hand, it weakens any narrative that one company was uniquely reckless. On the other, it raises the stakes for transparent disclosure, because if multiple labs share the same class of weakness, hiding the details also slows down ecosystem-wide mitigation. Of course, there is a real trade-off here. Publishing too much can become a how-to guide for attackers. Publishing too little makes outside experts unable to evaluate whether the policy response matches the technical reality. The current setup seems to have landed in the least satisfying middle enough alarm to justify restrictions, not enough detail to independently assess them. OpenAI's frustration about being pushed into partner-only limited rollouts follows from that. If the government can abruptly constrain deployment, it scrambles staged release plans that were supposed to manage risk in a more controlled way. Responsible deployment gets harder when the governing rule is unpredictability. On Chinese open-source competition, the loud claim is that some Chinese models already rival the US frontier. The more cautious counter is that a lot of that performance may come from distilling US model outputs, which means impressive imitation is not the same thing as independent frontier capability. That skepticism seems better supported than blanket hype, but it still doesn't solve the policy problem. Even if distilled models lag, the lag may be shrinking fast. The scenario some observers described is a lead narrowing from something like 9 months to maybe 3. That is not a settled forecast, but it's plausible enough to matter because firms make hedge decisions on plausible scenarios, not only on certainties. And here's the second-order effect. If US access becomes erratic, American companies may have more reason to adopt foreign alternatives as insurance. In that case, export controls meant to preserve advantage could speed adoption of lower trust but more available models. That's a classic policy own goal. The parenting conversation is a useful contrast because it treats AI neither as magic nor poison. Dr. Dana Susskind's HOPE framework is straightforward: human connection, owning imperfections, protecting early years, and enhancing technology rather than replacing people. The key claim underneath it is pretty modest and pretty strong. AI can help fill knowledge gaps, tutor, retrieve information, and support relationships, but it should not substitute for the human interaction that drives language and brain development, especially early on. That framework works because it starts with developmental needs rather than gadget capabilities. A parent asking whether a tool is convenient is asking a different question from whether it supports attachment, conversation, and age-appropriate learning. The practical advice follows pretty naturally. Set boundaries, supervise use, and choose tools that extend what a family is already trying to do well instead of offloading the relationship itself. Susskind's Detect checklist gives parents a decent quick filter: design, ethics, troubles, evidence, confidentiality, teaching. Run that against a smart crib like Cradlewise and you get a real trade-off instead of a culture war answer. The design may genuinely help exhausted parents by automating soothing and improving sleep. That's not trivial. But Detect forces the harder questions too. What data is collected and who can access it? How strong is the evidence that the product is safe and beneficial rather than just expensive and reassuring? Does convenience create over-reliance on automation in moments where parental observation still matters? This is where the processed food analogy is actually helpful. Some AI is more like a useful staple, some is more like ultra-processed snack engineering. The point is not purity, it's proportion, labeling, and matching oversight to risk. That leads to a saner regulatory model as well: standards, disclosures, and tiered scrutiny for higher-risk products, instead of pretending every AI tool belongs in the same bucket. Then there's the prediction market mess, starting with Polymarket. Critics went after the ad campaign for glamorizing gambling behind a thin multicultural gloss, and the reporting got worse when creator-promoted betting videos turned out to be fabricated, inflating apparent winnings by more than $1 million. That matters because prediction markets sell themselves on epistemic virtue. They're supposed to aggregate information. If the marketing layer is faking proof of profit, then the product is borrowing the prestige of truth-seeking while using the oldest casino trick in the book: make winning look normal. The dispute resolution design is also a real issue. Polymarket's optimistic oracle effectively gives influence to UMA token holders, which means truth arbitration can track token wealth, even if participants act in good faith most of the time. The structure invites the criticism that outcomes can be gamed or at least appear rigged. Meta's reported Arena project raises the stakes because it could plug prediction market mechanics into Instagram and Facebook, starting with virtual points but aiming toward real money. That combination deserves scrutiny on its own terms. The concern isn't that forecasting is inherently immoral, it's that betting loops embedded inside attention-maximizing platforms could amplify gambling harms, especially for younger users already being optimized for engagement. Calling prediction markets a cure for Instagram addiction, as Kalshi's CEO reportedly suggested, sounds less like a theory of wellness than a category mistake with major incentive problems. If your business already struggles to prove it can resist compulsive design, adding wagers does not make the burden of proof lighter, it makes it much heavier. That's it for Podkey Slopcast. The through line here is simple. The tool matters, but the rules and incentives around the tool matter just as much. See you next time. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.